Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is, pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30-minute Midas touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony, and with me, as always, my co-host, Mr. Monday Night, Mark Tipton.
With all due respect to RVD,
Well, this comes from TGB.
TGB. All right. I appreciate the moniker as always, and Mr. Monday Night. I do appreciate that. And this is an episode of the 30-minute Midas Touch podcast that I'm looking forward to be as much a member of the audience as a participant. This is a subject I have brought up before at different times during our podcast, and it's a subject that's been a thorn in my side for many years, and so we're going to delve back into it and try to look at it from a different perspective. And what I'm getting at is that the demise of WCW is something that has long bothered me. And today on the podcast, we want to discuss how or what steps could have been taken to save WCW.
Yeah, and this is kind of a my friend Poker Face, who you're familiar with. Poker Face and I, we exchange messages back and forth all week about random stuff, and sometimes they're about wrestling, sometimes they're not, but he's an avid listener to the Midas Touch, and he posed a question to me earlier this week. He said, if you were in charge of WCW, what would you do to save it? And I thought that was a very poignant question, because I've thought about it for years, and it's one of those things I've always been in the back of my mind. Well, I would have done this or I would have done that. So for me, it was just a great place to start. I guess the thing that I told him, the number one thing I would do from the beginning, like if I'm named, let's say early 2000, I'm named the president of WCW.
Okay.
So my first goal is to let the entire company know that we need to eliminate this culture that we're just trying to beat the WWE. That we're just here to beat the WWE, because that's not a healthy thought process to build a business on. I remember Ric Flair saying in one of his, I think it was his book, he said that, sometimes they would have meetings and all they would do is talk about WWE. They wouldn't talk about their product or what they could do or anything like that. They would just Bischoff would spend the entire time talking about what WWE's doing, why they're better, and why they're doing this, and all that kind of stuff. So, like I told someone the other day, being WWE's fine, being number one's fine. You should want to be number one. I don't discredit that. But you know what? There's Pepsi, there's Burger King, There's Adidas. All these things are not the number one companies, right, but they're very, very successful. Exactly. You understand? So I believe our first goal would be to, like I said, to just eliminate that culture that's the only reason we're here, and start building our own brand.
All right. And, well, on that thing, and I guess one of the things I've thought of it is that they ended up doing things that were not in their long-term self-interest because they weren't thinking like that. How do we beat WWE this week, as opposed to how do we build our company for the long term?
Right.
And that's always been one of my criticisms. That's interesting. Do you think that bled into, now, during the latter stages, and this may be a question more than anything, one of the things that they were criticized for was going with the more veteran talent. They went heavily into older wrestlers, and it's something that WWE frankly made fun of on their show. Do you think that was part of this mindset of, hey, we'll get this name and beat WWE this week, but may have worked against them in the long term?
Yeah, I know a lot of people say that WCW didn't create any stars. I don't believe that. You know what I mean? Because obviously we got DDP and Goldberg and they say Goldberg's the one star they created, but we got DDP, Goldberg, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Jericho, like so many guys came from Rey Mysterio, all came from WCW. You understand? So it's not like they only created. But yeah, their forte was not creating stars
Right.
for the main event. All those guys I just named, with the exception of DDP and Goldberg, never made it to the main event level in WCW. Right? So, leaning on the heavy wrestling, it's always got to be a healthy mix. You understand? Because we're telling stories, right? And if every story is young lion versus new lion, then it loses its luster. You understand? So like, you have to have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So yeah, we needed guys like Sting and Hogan and Savage, but we should have had more stuff with DDP and maybe bring Jericho up a little bit. Things like that.
All right. That's certainly fair. And I suppose we should move on to another subject here. Let's say the first one was don't be so WWF or E focused. As the hypothetical president of WCW, what would be your next suggestion?
So the next thing I would do is I would take the pay-per-views and I would scale them back from 16 back to 4. Because, and this is something James J. Dillon told me himself, that WCW never made a profit on a pay-per-view, right?
Which stunned me.
Which is unbelievable, right? But he said they never had the business model right. They never understood how to do it. Ergo, WWE always made a profit on their pay-per-views, right? So for me, the number one thing was, if we're losing money on pay-per-views, then we shouldn't be doing so many, right? So let's start with 4 and try to make them profitable. And then if they become profitable, then we can move on from there. Then also I would bring back the Clash of Champions, and that would be kind of my filler in between the big 4. Right?
Give you something to build to.
Yeah,
in between.
And that'll give that'll be a good way to entice advertisers too. Hey, we're going to do this one on TBS. You know what I mean? So we'll have 3 hours on TBS.
Which would potentially have a wider audience than a pay-per-view would.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
But it'd be something that you could build gradually from there.
All right. Well, this one makes a whole lot of sense in that when you've laid out what James J. Dillon said, the thing that sprang to my mind was, if it doesn't make dollars, it doesn't make sense. And so if these pay-per-views are not making money, then, and this may go back to suggestion number 1. Other than competing with WWE with monthly pay-per-views, or in this case, more than monthly pay-per-views, why else would you do it if it's not making money? And that may have been the rationale behind it. They thought they needed to. And personally, I always felt that for pay-per-views, it really built the anticipation more. I miss the classic Mean Gene. I'm here at the SummerSlam News Center reporting, and the build-up. I always enjoyed those things, and it was something I look forward to each week on the television. And so 4, I was more than happy with that. But that does make sense. If you're not making money, why throw good money after bad?
Right.
All right. Well, now we've hit on these 2. The next thing I would like to get into is, what would be another thing you would suggest for the company?
So, obviously at this time, too, near the end there, WWE had decided, hey, we're going to go this ultra shock, television kind of route. Nudity, cussing, we're going to push every boundary we possibly can. Now, WCW, they looked at that and they were pigeon-held by, by corporate suits where they weren't going to be able to go as far as WWE went. The problem was, I think they tried to get as close as they could, and they failed miserably, obviously, because they never could quite get into that realm. But for me, if WWE is this, then we're going to be completely family friendly. We're going to be professional wrestling. We're going to be everything they're not, and hopefully that kind of thing would not only, because, and I've said this before, I got started in wrestling at the end of the Attitude Era, right? And when I got started, wrestling was super hot. and we all wanted to be a part of it. And there was like 30 or 40 of us between the ages of 14 and 20 that were all friends trying to break in the business together. And then about 6 or 7 years after that, we're looking around and we're like, where the fuck is everybody? There's no new kids coming out in droves like that to do it. And what had happened was, I started thinking about it. What had happened was parents turned off the television. They're like, you're not watching that because it's got cussing and nudity and all that kind of stuff. So as hot as the Attitude Era was for the 18 to 34 demographic, then, but for the kids, it really left them kind of in limbo as far as creating new fans. Because like I've said before, if you get the kids, then you get the adults too most of the time, right?
All right. And now this one has an air of logic to it because given they were owned by Time Warner and, they're going to be limited, and WWE, they may have gone public during that. They had during that time, but they were still an independent, and they still are an independent company.
Yeah.
Rumors aside, they still are a independent company at this point.
Yeah.
They are publicly traded. And so I guess the air of logic is, why would you try to out-attitude the Attitude Era? That's what they're doing, and they're doing it well and being successful, but are you going to beat them at their own game?
Right.
And that comes back to, they were so focused on WWE.
Yeah.
And it's kind of where I was going, about being long-term thinking instead of short-term.
Yeah.
This is the hot thing right now. Okay, well, what's going to make our company be around for the long term?
Well, also too, like, you think about this, like, not only are you trying to entice those fans that have left professional wrestling because of that kind of stuff, right? We're trying to get those fans back, but also advertisers. There was a lot of advertisers that wouldn't advertise on professional wrestling just because of the content of it. They didn't want their brand associated with that brand and things like that. Now, think about how that could have opened up WCW for sponsorship. If they're the two biggest companies and one is very R-rated,
exactly,
and the one is, hey, family friendly, I think advertisers are more or less going to go with the family friendly products.
Right, because they remain. I'm sure they would still remain competitive in the ratings as they were, but it does a way to differentiate yourself. Excuse me, which is something even individual wrestlers think about. I know that talents. You're trying to get noticed. You want to differentiate yourself from other folks on the card, and the same way could be said of the company itself.
True, very true.
All right. Okay. Well, we've got that, and now it would next to be what would be the next on the if you were making a PowerPoint presentation, what would be the next bullet point for WCW?
The next bullet point would be to move Nitro back to 2 hours. Move Nitro to 2 hours. Make Thunder, WCW Saturday Night, and WCW Main Event, make them all an hour. And then make Nitro the 2 hour premiere show. And then the other ones be where, hey, we can try out this guy on this thing, or, further the angles for Monday. But I think that's one of the big things that killed them, because it's very hard to come up with content every week when you're a wrestling company like that. 2 hours is hard. 3 hours is almost impossible. I have seen, there's been no weekly 3 hour wrestling show that has successfully done it, in my opinion, because it all ends up faltering.
Okay, so, this argument, which I certainly find appealing and really holds true today. Basically, what you're talking about is quality versus quantity. Yes, you have the 3 hours, but by the time you spread yourself thin, kind of creating entertainment for that longer show, some of it's going to suffer. You're not going to be able to focus on all the elements that go into the show as you would if it was a little more compact. Is that where you're going?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a very good assessment because, like I said, and I've said this before too, like we do mostly here in Pro Wrestling Mid-South, we do 5 matches. And I've said that before because if I look at my roster and I have a possible 100 matches, if I do 5 matches a week, that's 20 weeks worth of matches, of unique matches that I have. Well, if I do 7, that ends up being 13, 14 weeks. You understand? So it dramatically shifts your storytelling, and speeds things up, in a way you don't want it to be sped up. Right? So same thing with Nitro. Even though they had an unlimited number of guys, eventually you're going to run into a brick wall of what do we do now? Right? So the less content you got to fill, the more content you have. Does that make sense?
Okay. And really, even looking aside from WCW, that's something that has come up since Monday Night Raw went to 3 hours. There have been a great many people that have criticized it. And on one occasion, I think Triple H even hinted that he would like to have it a 2-hour show. But, hey, business is business. And if USA is offering the extra money, I understand you can't, in this case, if it makes dollars, it makes sense, so to speak, from their perspective, even though if it affects the show. And it is one of the questions I have in my mind right now about AEW. Obviously, I think having competition in professional wrestling is good for both. I'm not, without disrespecting other wrestling promotions. In my mind, there's 2 national promotions at this time. And I've seen AEW going through where they are expanding. They're adding a Friday night show. Now they're going to have 2 YouTube shows. And it really seems like a great deal of expansion for a relatively young company.
Yeah, and AEW, they're not following any kind of rhyme or reason either. Like I said before, they're one of the only companies that the pandemic actually helped them. Because, they were trying to tour and do all these big arenas, and they were having trouble filling them very much so. You know what I mean? Like the first week, yeah. But then the 6th week, 7th week, 10th week, it was half full, quarter full, third full, stuff like that, right? So when they went into the pandemic, all of a sudden, they had to back up and punt, basically, and basically start doing all their filming from one location, which is how every major wrestling company ever started. Right. You understand? By picking one location, you tape in that one location, you put it on television, you figure out where your TV's the strongest, then you start running house shows in those towns, right? So, and like I said, in AEW, they just stumbled upon that. But now here we are, like I said, they've got that, they got a Friday night show coming up, they got 2, things, and and this is something that's been indicative of the last 10, 15 years too, is they're just trying to work the boys. And what that means is they're just trying to sell it to the boys. So like all these kids that are from across the country that get to be on AEW Dark, everyone gets to brag about being on AEW Dark. Well, you're getting beat in 2 minutes. You know what I mean? If they really liked you, if they really wanted to use you, they wouldn't put you in that spot. They would keep you off television until they were ready to do something serious with you. Because every time you get on television and are bad, whether I'm not saying you can't lose, I'm saying some guys aren't ready for television. As I said before, some guys need to go back in the oven because they're just not quite ready.
Yeah, a little more preparation would be beneficial. All right, that is something that I have contemplated, and because I want to see competition and more places for guys to ply their trade and get better, I have been concerned when I saw about the rapid expansion, and it's just something they have to understand. For instance, WWE, I saw reports that they are near capacity for SummerSlam. And we have no idea what's going to happen at SummerSlam. Those tickets are being sold clearly on WWE reputation. Well, that reputation was built over 50 plus years. I forgot how many years they are now. AEW doesn't have that. And so for them to think they can tour and sell out buildings the same way the larger company can seems, short-sighted, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Well, it's just Tony Khan, it's one of the worst things. He thinks he knows wrestling but has no idea. And they're just using him. All the wrestlers that are in charge of that are just using him to line their pockets and do whatever they want to do.
I think the word I was searching for came to me was naive. Would that be a good word?
Yeah, that's a very good word. I would definitely call him naive.
All right. I admit I strayed us off there a little bit.
Sure.
Let me try to get us back on course here. Now we've gone through about 4 suggestions here. What would be the next suggestion for WCW, how they could have been saved?
Well, you already kind of touched on it. You have to create new stars. That's what this business has always been about, is who's, to have the pun in there, who's next?
Very good.
You know what I mean? So, I'm going to run down the WCW roster in the year 2000, okay?
All right.
And I want you to hear some of these names. Ahmed Johnson, Alondra Blaze, Medusa, Bam Bam Bigelow, Big Vito, Billy Kidman, Bobby Heenan, Booker T, Bret Hart, Brian Adams, Brian Knobbs, Brian Clark, Buff Bagwell, Chris Benoit, Chris Candido, Chris Harris, Chris Canyon, Christopher Daniels, Chuck Palumbo, Kurt Hennig, Daphne, Dave Taylor, David Arquette, David Pinzer, Dean Malenko, Diamond Dallas Page, Disco, Dustin Rhodes, Dusty Rhodes, Eddie Guerrero, Elix Skipper, Ernest Miller, Fit Finley, Gene Okerlund, Hugh Morris. It's general erection on here. I'm not going to say.
Okay.
I'm not going to put him over as that.
No,
Goldberg,
that was awful.
Hulk Hogan, Jamie Noble, Jeff Jarrett, Jeremy Borash, Jim Duggan, Jimmy Hart, Jimmy Yang, John Laurinaitis, Johnny Stamboli, Juventud Guerrera, Kevin Nash, Conan, La Parka, Lance Storm, Larry Zbyszko, Chavo Guerrero, Mark Jindrak, Ming, Mike Awesome, Mike Rotunda, Mike Tenay, Miss Elizabeth, Miss Hancock, Molly Holly, Mr. Jones, which is Vincent,
Okay.
Paul Orndorff, Perry Saturn, Pierre Carl Ouellette, Psychosis, Randy Savage, Rey Mysterio, Ric Flair, Rick Steiner, Roddy Piper, Samantha, who I do not remember at all, Scott Hall, Scott Steiner, Sean O'Hare, Shane Douglas, Shane Helm, Shannon Moore, Shark Boy, Charmel, Sean Stasiak, Sid Vicious, Steven Regal, Stevie Ray, Sting, Sonny, Terry Funk, Barbarian, The Great Muta, Lex Luger, Tony Marinara, Tony Schiavone, and Vampiro.
Okay. Now, obviously, setting aside how long that list is, I guess I had kind of.
It says 91 wrestlers. 91.
That's a huge roster to start with.
Let's see. I mean,
At least it feels that way just listening to you call
Yeah,
them off. And I almost wondered, maybe taking that and focusing on any one individual seems really difficult to me. And the thing that stuck out is when you mentioned some of the bigger names that were more recognizable to me, many of them were people that were imports, so to speak, from WWE or WWF, as they were known at the time. And there wasn't. I was trying to listen how many of those I thought were WCW originals, for lack of a better term. And there were not many.
no, not at all. I mean, and like I said, I named 91 people there. It looks like there's 83 men on the roster at this time. Of course, that's including like Tony Schiavone and guys like that too.
Sure.
But I mean, that's just an astronomical number. That's another way. Obviously, we're going to eliminate some contracts. We're gonna streamline things a little better. You know what I mean? Like I said, I'm big on. Not everyone has to have a 7, 8, 10-year run. There's nothing wrong with working for me for 2 years, and then you go do what you need to do for a little bit, and when time is right, I bring you back. If I got another spot for you that I think you'll work in, see what I'm saying? Like, I know guys want to have a steady paycheck and things like that, but at the end of the day, we have to turn a profit. So some of the guys obviously are expendable, but obviously we have to create new stars too. So you have to take a chance on some young talents. One that stood out to me, obviously, is Mark Jindrak, who had an amazing look, very athletic. Apparently, from what I've understood, he was a very cerebral kind of guy as well. But just never panned out, really, in professional wrestling. So, I mean, it's just one of those trial and error kind of things. Now, of course, you got guys like, Shane Helms and guys like that ended up being huge stars for the WWE as the Hurricane and things like that. But then we talked about, here's Mike Rotunda again, who like I said before, was a great utility guy. You know what I mean? So I would definitely keep him on the roster just for the workhorse mentality of, well, I can put anyone in there with him and they're going to have a good match. Sean O'Hare as well, Mark Jindrak and Sean O'Hare. You know what I mean? Both those guys are one and the same pretty much, but that's another guy that, maybe could have done something, maybe couldn't. We'll never know.
Okay. Well, one of the things that stands out to me is this may come back to one of your earlier points, because when you're trying to develop a new star, you're going to have to invest time in one of these individuals, whoever you choose it's going to be, whoever that may be, whoever you want to go with. Generally, it's going to take a time to introduce this new individual and try to get support behind him, positive or negative, or whatever the case may be. And if your mindset is, hey, we've got to beat WWF or WWE this week, do you want to use some of your airtime as what would be a long-term strategy in investing in this new guy, whoever it may be, whoever you believe is your future? Invest that time in him, which may cost us in a certain quarter hour of the ratings.
Yeah, it's a little bit of give and take, like you're talking about there. WCW was so, they didn't understand talent. And what I mean by that is, like, Bischoff was not a wrestling guy. He was a business guy. He knew how to get over with the corporate suits and things like that, and that's how he really got in position. He didn't really have the wrestling mind that, say, a Kevin Sullivan or a Mike Graham or, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair, all those kind of guys that could have helped with the wrestling side of it. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't have that ability. You understand? But, like, if we would have had a wrestling person there, then a lot of mistakes would have been avoided. Like, for instance, Bret Hart.
Oh.
Because whoever's decision it was to not have Bret Hart on Monday Night Nitro the night after the screw job, that was one of the biggest mistakes in professional wrestling history, in my opinion. Because at that moment in time, he was the hottest babyface in the world. You understand? Because they created the situation where Vince screwed him, and the whole world knew it, and it was just one of those things, and you lived it like I did, like everyone was talking about it.
Yeah, literally served up to them
on a silver platter. But no, let's wait till Starrcade a month later. So that hurt, And then a month later, we wait for him. He's a special guest referee for Zbyszko and Bischoff, right? Yeah. But then Hogan and Sting have the match, and Hogan leg drop Sting. It's supposed to be a fast count by Nick Patrick.
Right.
Then here comes Bret Hart. But Hogan had convinced Nick Patrick, apparently, to do a normal count. So you were watching that night too, right?
I believe, yeah.
I was watching that night too, and Hogan hit the leg drop, 1, 2, 3, and we all just kind of went, "What the hell?" And we were all just kind of like in limbo, like, did he just get beat with that simply by a leg drop right there, in the middle of the match like that? And then all of a sudden, Bret Hart shows up. It's like, oh, that was a fast count. I was like, oh, I guess it was a fast count. Yeah, not really.
Okay, yeah, I missed that. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But then they restarted the match and Sting won. But like, to me, that was such a killer for the company because it completely killed Bret Hart's momentum. It completely killed Sting's momentum. You understand? And those two guys. Imagine having a company and your two top baby faces are Bret Hart and Sting.
Yeah, it would be wonderful.
Yeah, I mean
you should be in business.
Yeah, exactly. And then building to an actual Bret Hart versus Hulk Hogan, because we never got that in WWE. Right. Building to that, would have been huge. But once again, hindsight 2020. But like at the same time, like I make wrestling decisions on a daily basis, right? So I mean, like I think about all this stuff 24/7. So, like, to me, I just can't see how anyone in their right mind in professional wrestling would have said, "Hey, no. I know he's the hottest thing right now, but let's make him wait." You know what I mean? Like, no, give it to him. Give it to him and build to whatever. Build to the next. Like you always say, it's always about next week.
Right.
Right. Let's build till next week.
And I don't know. As a fan, maybe this is just my aggravation. I've mentioned my aggravation with the way Bret Hart was handled, and ultimately the way his career ended. But it almost felt to me as though WCW was more interested in taking Bret Hart away from WWF or E than they were in having him be a part of their organization.
And that's a very, very valid thing. And that goes back to my original number one, which was, hey, we need to stop that mentality of we're just here to beat the WWE. You understand? Like, I've had guys that are very, very talented, reach out to me and say, hey, I'd like to come work for Pro Wrestling Mid-South. And I say, no, I just don't think it'd fit. Because I don't think that they would fit with our current guys. And then maybe they have some issues that we've had in the past with egos or whatever it is. But, like, I don't want to poison the locker room like that, and I want everything to fit. So I've told people no plenty of times as far as them coming in. So, like, with this, like you said, though, it was just, he's from WWF. Okay, let's get him. He's a former world champion. Oh, perfect. We'll just put, as long as we got him on the fucking roster, it's okay.
Now, do we have a plan on what to do with him once we get him here? Well, I couldn't see one.
Right.
And ultimately, to me, having him as a part of your organization, I would think, you mentioned Mike Rotunda as far as being a positive influence and a workhorse. Would Bret Hart not be the kind of guy, when we're trying to develop new stars, the kind of guy to have in a locker room, a guy with a family history in the business and, dedication and all those things, be a good guy to say, hey, here's a way to conduct yourself as a professional wrestler on this level?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Bret is, in some circles, he considered the GOAT. A lot of people consider him the greatest wrestler of all time, and there's a handful of guys that when people say that they're the greatest of all time, I don't dispute it because I can see how they would say that, right? Bret Hart is one of those for me, like, I'm not going to dispute if you say Bret Hart's the greatest of all time. If that's your opinion, okay, more power to you. But there's also guys like Shawn Michaels and Hulk Hogan and Stone Cold and Ric Flair. And,
thank you.
Well, it hurt me to say Ric Flair right there, right now. I still have a lingering issue with the Nature Boy.
I was about to just jump in right there.
Okay. But that seems to be the general consensus with WCW is that they just didn't know any better. They made all these monumental mistakes that eventually led to their demise.
Well, I guess what I was getting at is sort of planning. And I do see our time is running short, but it seems like they were doing stuff week to week without a long-term plan, I guess and having that kind of plan, whether it came from Bischoff or because wherever it needed to come from, they needed to have a plan, and I did not feel that they did.
Right. And let me say something about, because we've talked about short-term, long-term booking before. Let me say this too, like, you don't, as a professional wrestling booker, you don't plan out every detail for the next year, but you know where you want to be in a year. Does that make sense? Because the minute you start planning out everything, that's when something's going to fuck up everything you've got planned, right? So you basically you have a thing down the road saying, hey, this is where I want to be by Starrcade. I want these two guys to be in the main event. I want this to be the draw, blah, 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 that kind of stuff. That's my card. And then you work towards that, right? And see, that's why I don't think WCW, like you said, they didn't do anything like that. Okay, they may know what they're going to do on the next pay-per-view, maybe, but how they got there was anybody's guess.
Or you do things like decide to have a Hell in a Cell match on live television with less than 24 hours to promote it.
A la the Georgia Dome.
Exactly.
So, we are overtime once again, not quite as bad as previous weeks. But for myself, the Golden Boy Greg Anthony, and my co-host, Mr. Monday Night, Mark Tipton, thank you and goodbye.